please subscribe and share for more story. The smell of roasted thyme and sage should have offered Margaret Banks the comfort of family, warmth, and lazy Thanksgiving happiness. But instead, it felt like a barrier holding her outside the joy she could hear in the dining room. She stood just before the doorway, her hands aching from 2 heavy canvas bags. Inside one were 2 homemade pecan pies, carefully crimped by her own fingers. Inside the other sat a bottle of aged Merlot she had saved for almost a year, waiting for this day. It was her first Thanksgiving at her daughter Amelia's new home, a wide, polished 2-story colonial she had never been invited to see until a short text arrived 3 days earlier. No phone call, no warmth, just, "Mom, come over on the 27th at 1. Family dinner." She had replied with a single heart emoji, hoping to create peace. Her daughter never answered. Margaret rang the doorbell 10 minutes ago. Her son-in-law, Ryan, opened with a glass of whiskey in his hand and a smile that never reached his eyes. "Hi, Margaret. You're right on time," he said, giving her a papery kiss on the cheek before walking away. Margaret stepped inside. The smell of turkey wrapped around her, heavy and seasoned. The dining table, visible from the entryway, seemed staged for a magazine. Crystal glasses caught the glow of a brass chandelier. Cream napkins were folded into elegant fans. Everything looked perfect, too perfect. Her heart, already unsteady with nerves, tightened. There were 6 chairs around the polished oak table. Every seat was taken. Amelia sat at the head, Ryan at the opposite end. Beside them sat Ryan's parents, Charles and Sylvia Harper. Charles, a broad man with a booming laugh, was carving the turkey. Sylvia, her brown hair stiff with hairspray, admired him like an audience member watching a show. Their lips turned briefly toward Margaret in acknowledgement, but they returned to their private jokes instantly. The last 2 chairs belonged to Margaret's granddaughters. Harper, 8, wore a velvet hairband. Tessa, 6, sat in a navy dress Margaret bought her last spring. When they saw Margaret, they brightened, but before Tessa could wave, Amelia's sharp whisper sliced the air. "Tessa, sit still. We're about to say grace." Margaret stood frozen, coat still on, bags still digging into her shoulders. Nobody rose. Nobody fetched another chair. Nobody invited her into the circle. Amelia finally raised her head, offering a tight, brittle smile, the kind you give an inconvenient stranger. "Mom, so glad you made it," she said, her voice too sweet, too stretched. Margaret swallowed hard. "I brought pies. And the wine." Amelia nodded faintly. "Great. Just drop them in the kitchen." Margaret walked toward the spotless gray and white kitchen, dropped the bags on the cold marble counter, and tried to steady the shaking in her hands. She returned to the dining room. The family was already eating. Ryan spooned mashed potatoes onto Sylvia's plate. Charles laughed at one of his own jokes. The girls sat silently. It was as if Margaret had stepped into the wrong house. She moved slowly toward the table. "Amelia, where should I sit?" she asked quietly. Amelia looked up, her eyes scanning the table, not in confusion, but in something colder. A decision. "Oh, Mom," Amelia said in syrupy pity, "we organized the table differently this year. 6 chairs. 6 people." Margaret blinked at the cruelty disguised as politeness. Amelia continued, lowering her voice as though she were being generous. "Charles and Sylvia came all the way from Oregon. It's been years since they joined us for Thanksgiving. So Ryan and I decided this year would be something special, just for them." Margaret's voice cracked. "And me?" Amelia sighed dramatically, wiping her manicured hands on her napkin. "Mom, don't take it personally. This year is about intimacy. Just the people who truly matter. You understand priorities." That word hit Margaret like a slap. Priorities. Ryan placed a full plate in front of Sylvia. Sylvia placed her hand over his. "Thank you, sweetheart. It's perfect." Charles raised his glass. To family, everyone lifted their glasses, except Margaret, who had none, because she had no glass. No plate, no seat, Margaret stood alone in her coat, hands empty, heart crumbling. Amelia glanced at her again, offered a tight smile, and whispered, "Mom, if you want, you can wait in the living room. We'll chat after dinner." After dinner. As if Margaret were a delivery driver dropping off packages. She looked at Harper and Tessa. Harper stared at her plate, silent, and Tessa pushed one green bean around with her fork. Nobody asked why Grandma was standing. Sylvia raised her glass toward Amelia. "Darling, this is beautiful. I can't tell you how long it's been since I felt truly included in the family." Amelia beamed, truly beamed, and Margaret realized her daughter had not smiled at her like that in years. "You're a priority," Amelia told Sylvia. There was again that cutting word. Margaret stepped back. 1 step. 2 steps. No one turned. No one noticed. She reached the entryway, picked up her purse, and pulled out her phone with trembling fingers. In that hallway, surrounded by laughter she no longer belonged to, she made a lifelong decision. She opened her banking app. For almost 4 years, she had transferred $1,200 every month into Amelia's account. She pressed Cancel Transfer. A digital message confirmed it. She removed the secondary credit card in Amelia's name, the one Amelia used for groceries and emergencies. Then Margaret called her bank. "I want to terminate a lease at Ward Street, Unit 3C. The automated voice asked if she was sure. Margaret whispered, "I'm certain." Margaret ended the call and slipped her phone back into her purse. The cold November wind hit her as she walked down the front steps. She did not slam the door. She did not cry or scream. She simply left. If she was not a priority, they were no longer her priority either. The cold air felt like knives against her cheeks, but she kept walking, past glowing porches and windows full of families sharing warmth. It hurt, but it also felt strangely freeing. She walked almost 5 blocks before she realized she was shaking, not only from the cold, but from adrenaline and grief. She sat on a frosty bench in a small city park. The trees were covered in twinkling holiday lights. A couple passed by laughing, their hands linked. Margaret stared at her phone again. She looked at the cancellation receipt. $1,200 every month for almost 4 years. That meant she had given Amelia more than $57,000, and that did not count the credit card expenses. Amelia often charged another $900 to $1,000 monthly for groceries, gas, or clothes. Margaret exhaled shakily. She had financed an entire lifestyle, and Amelia had spoken the word priorities right to her face. Then the memory struck, sharp and painful. It began 7 years earlier. Amelia had just turned 30. Margaret was 60. Amelia visited her small paid-off house with Ryan. He was polite but distant. Amelia was glowing. She had survived a painful divorce. Margaret had supported her emotionally through every piece of it. Now Amelia stood in the kitchen and announced, "Mom, we're getting married." Margaret hugged her tight. "Honey, that's wonderful. I just want you happy." Amelia smiled. "I am. Ryan is thoughtful. He takes care of me." The wedding was simple, but not cheap. Margaret paid for Amelia's dress, the venue deposit, and the catering. Amelia said, embarrassed, "Mom, Ryan is saving for a down payment. We don't want to go into debt for a party." Margaret waved off the worry. "I'll cover it. Don't stress." Margaret spent over $18,000 on the wedding that year. Amelia kissed her cheek in thanks. Ryan offered a thin smile that never warmed. 6 months later, Harper was born. Amelia stopped working. Ryan's insurance commission barely covered the rent on a tiny 2-bedroom apartment. Margaret visited weekly, bringing diapers, groceries, baby clothes. One afternoon, Margaret found Amelia crying on the living room floor, surrounded by overdue bills. Harper slept in her crib, unaware of the panic filling the room. "We can't make it, Mom," Amelia sobbed. "We won't get through the month." Margaret sat beside her daughter and asked softly, "How much do you need?" Amelia shook her head. "I can't ask you again. You've done too much." Margaret squeezed her hand. "Tell me." Amelia whispered, 800. "Just for now. I'll pay it back." Margaret wrote a check for $1,000. Don't pay me back. Use it for Harper. Amelia hugged her, crying. You're the best, Mom. But 1 month became 2, then 6, then a year. Every time Margaret asked gently, Are things improving? Amelia had a new reason. Harper had a cold. Ryan lost a client. Rent increased. And Margaret always helped. Because she loved them. When Tessa was born 2 years later, things got worse. Ryan missed a promotion. Amelia refused to work. Who will watch the girls? She complained. Just until Tessa starts preschool. Margaret kept sending money, but now it was holidays, birthdays, coats, ballet lessons, car repairs. She paid for nearly everything. 2 years earlier, Amelia called sounding breathless. Mom, we found the most beautiful apartment. It's in Wycliffe Meadows. 3 bedrooms, shared pool, gym, safe neighborhood. The girls could go to a better school. Margaret hesitated, her retirement savings shrinking, but she wanted safety for her grandchildren. That sounds wonderful. Can Ryan afford it? There was a long pause. Amelia's voice softened. The rent is $2,200 a month. Ryan earns $2,900. That leaves $700 for everything else. Margaret understood exactly what Amelia wanted. How much do you need? Amelia spoke quickly. Just the rent. For now. We'll use Ryan's salary for the girls and bills. And once he gets his next raise, we'll pay you back every cent. Margaret agreed. She called the landlord, signed the lease in her own name, paid the deposit, paid the first month, and the second. And then month after month, year after year, Ryan never got a raise. Amelia stopped mentioning payback. And Margaret stayed quiet because she thought that was what love meant. But something shifted about a year ago. Amelia stopped calling often. What used to be daily messages became weekly, then monthly silence. When Margaret called, Amelia answered with irritation. Mom, I'll call later. I'm busy with the girls, or I'm exhausted. Tomorrow. The tomorrows never came. Margaret stopped visiting without warning. The one time she did, Amelia frowned at the doorway. Mom, you should have called. The house is a mess. Margaret apologized, holding 2 bags of groceries she bought. I just wanted to see the girls. Amelia sighed. Next time, call first. Visits turned awkward. Margaret sat on the plush sofa, one she secretly financed, while Amelia cleaned or scrolled through her phone. The girls stayed in their rooms. Ryan came home and mumbled, Hey, Margaret, before disappearing. She stayed an hour, felt unwelcome, and left. One afternoon, she overheard Amelia on the phone with Sylvia. Amelia didn't know Margaret was in the living room. Yeah, Sylvia, I know. My mom is just too much. She always shows up. She doesn't get we have our own life now. Margaret froze. She slipped out without saying goodbye. Amelia never noticed. From then on, Margaret waited. She waited for Amelia to call. She waited for her to ask how she was. 3 empty weeks passed. Until the cold Thanksgiving text. Mom, come over on the 27th at 1. Family dinner. Margaret arrived full of hope, but found herself treated like an outsider, dismissed as unimportant, replaced by Sylvia in every emotional seat she once held. She remembered how Amelia smiled toward Sylvia at that table, genuine, warm, proud. Margaret realized she had bought Amelia's comfort and received emotional abandonment in return. Sitting alone in the park that night, Margaret whispered, No more. She walked to the nearest bus stop. As she waited, she accepted that Amelia's beautiful new life was a performance, one built on her money. And Margaret had just removed the foundation. She felt scared, but alive. She imagined Amelia discovering the canceled transfers. She imagined the apartment lease notice. She didn't wish ruin, but she no longer intended to rescue grown adults who told her she did not matter. As the bus approached, she made one final silent promise. I will not be invisible anymore. Margaret returned to her modest apartment as the last sunlight faded. She switched on her lamp. The usual silence did not feel lonely. It felt like breathing again. She brewed tea and sat by the window. 3 missed messages lit her screen. None from Amelia. One was from the bank confirming cancellations. The last was from an unknown number. Margaret opened it. "Mrs. Banks, this is Danielle Price. You may not remember me. We were neighbors 12 years ago at the old apartment on Maple Street." Danielle continued speaking quickly, almost emotional. "I'm a partner now, family and estate law. If you ever need legal support, I'm yours. No fees. Consider it repayment." Margaret stayed silent for a moment. The timing felt unreal, almost like life had placed a safety net beneath her feet right when she released everyone else. "Thank you, Danielle," she said softly. "I'll remember that." Danielle hesitated. "Mrs. Banks, are you okay? You sound different." Margaret stared through the window at the blinking city lights. "Yes, Danielle. Everything is changing." Danielle promised to send her contact information. Moments later, a message arrived. "Danielle Price, partner, Price and Holloway Law Group, family and estate practice." Margaret saved it. She didn't know if she would need legal help, but something inside her already sensed a storm was coming. For the first time in years, Margaret slept deeply. The next morning, she woke up with a purpose she could feel in her bones. Not anger, not revenge. Something stronger, self-respect. She dialed Danielle again.
"I
need help today." Danielle responded instantly. "Come in. Bring everything." That afternoon, Margaret arrived at Danielle's downtown office. Glass walls, chrome fixtures, bold artwork. Danielle came out in a fitted blazer, powerful and confident. She hugged Margaret warmly. "Come in. We can work from my conference room." Margaret placed a folder on the table, bank records, lease agreements, credit card statements. Danielle's eyes sharpened as she read. Margaret told the entire story. The money for the wedding, the monthly transfers, the credit card charges, the lease in her name, the Thanksgiving humiliation, the empty chair, the word priorities. Danielle listened carefully, anger growing in her eyes. "Mrs. Banks," she said finally, "you are legally free. You have every right to stop paying. The lease is yours. The card is yours. None of these payments were obligations. They were gifts. But Amelia and Ryan will panic and likely react badly." Margaret nodded. "I understand. I'm done rescuing them." Danielle nodded. "Then let's make it official. I'll send a written notice to the landlord ending your lease responsibility. And I'll send a certified letter to Amelia and Ryan informing them the lease will not be renewed unless they sign financially." Danielle paused. "They won't qualify." Margaret took a breath. "Then that's their issue now." 2 days passed. Margaret expected calls. None came. On Friday afternoon, she received a message from Amelia. "Mom, something's wrong with my card.
Can you check it?"
It's declining." Margaret set the phone aside. She did not reply. 2 hours later, another message. "Mom, this is serious. I tried to get groceries. The card was rejected. Call me." Margaret placed the phone face down. That evening, Amelia called. Margaret let it ring until voicemail. Amelia's voice cracked through the recording. "Mom, the bank said the card was canceled. Please tell me you didn't do this without telling me." Margaret deleted it. Monday morning, Danielle called. "Mrs. Banks, the landlord processed your termination. He already sent Amelia and Ryan written notice. They have 30 days to vacate or sign their own lease." Margaret closed her eyes. Relief and pain tangled together. Minutes later, her phone lit up. "Amelia." Margaret let it ring, and ring, and ring. Then she answered. "Mom." Amelia's voice shot through the phone, shrill, panicked. "What did you do?" "The landlord said the lease is canceled. You're forcing us out. We'll be homeless." Margaret remained calm. "You're an adult. You're married. You can sign your own lease." Amelia gasped. "We can't. You know that. The rent is too high. Why would you do this?" Margaret's reply was steady. "Let me ask you something. The card I canceled? The apartment I stopped paying for? Did you ever ask where the money came from?" Silence. Amelia tried again. "It was an emergency card." Margaret corrected her. "It was a card I paid every month. And the transfers, $1, 200 on the first of each month. Did you believe Ryan's commissions were that consistent? Silence again, longer this time. Margaret continued. And the apartment, 2 bedrooms, gym, school district, you think it paid itself? Amelia, I paid every dollar of that rent for 24 months. Amelia finally choked out. No.
No, that can't be.
Ryan said. Margaret cut her off. Ryan's salary pays for food and gas. I paid for your life. And on Thanksgiving, you told me I wasn't a priority. I simply accepted that. Amelia's voice dropped into something hateful. You're sick. You're controlling. That's why Dad left you. Nobody can stand you. Margaret did not flinch. She had heard that teenage insult too many times. Now it sounded pathetic, not powerful. I have nothing else to say, Margaret replied. You have 30 days. Maybe call Sylvia. She's clearly your priority now. She ended the call. Margaret sat still, and the tears she refused at Amelia's dinner table finally came. Not tears of guilt, tears of freedom. A week later, a knock sounded at Margaret's door. A courier handed her a thick envelope. She opened it and stared in disbelief. Amelia was suing her. The claim accused Margaret of financial abandonment, saying she created dependency and then caused emotional distress by withdrawing support. Margaret took the papers straight to Danielle. Danielle skimmed them, then laughed bitterly. This won't survive first hearing. She is a married adult. You owe her nothing. Margaret nodded. Let's fight it. Danielle smiled. With pleasure. 2 weeks later, they stood in a family courtroom. Amelia looked smaller than Margaret remembered, pale, thin, furious. Ryan stared at the floor. Sylvia was nowhere in sight. Amelia's young lawyer tried to argue dependency, that Margaret had a moral obligation to maintain support. Danielle rose.
She didn't argue emotionally.
She presented receipts. Your Honor, here is the $18,000 wedding support. Here are the monthly transfers totaling $57,600. Here are credit card expenses totaling more than $21,000. And here, she slapped a binder down, is the apartment lease and bank proof covering $52,800 in rent paid by Mrs. Banks alone. The judge stared at the papers, then at Amelia. Do you work? He asked.
No.
I care for my children. The judge turned to Ryan. Do you work? Yes. Then he looked at Margaret. Why did you stop paying? Margaret stood. Her voice was steady. On Thanksgiving, I brought pies to my daughter. She seated 6 people. There was no chair for me. She told me she was celebrating only with the people who truly matter and that I was not a priority. So, I accepted her choice. The judge closed his folder. Case dismissed. The judge continued. This claim is irresponsible and ungrateful. I am ordering the plaintiff, Miss Harper, to pay the defendant's legal fees. A broken sound left Amelia's throat, pain mixed with shock. The courtroom emptied. Days later, Danielle updated Margaret. Amelia and Ryan vacated the apartment. They could not afford the rent. 3 months passed. Margaret received a call from a school administrator. Mrs. Banks, this is Juniper Ridge Elementary. You are listed as an emergency contact for Harper. Margaret's heart squeezed. Is she hurt? She is physically fine. She suffered a panic episode in class and is asking for you. We could not reach her mother. The number is disconnected. Margaret was out the door within minutes. She arrived at the nurse's office. Harper sat curled on a cot, eyes swollen. When she saw Margaret, she ran forward. Grandma, you came. You came. Margaret wrapped her arms around her. Of course I did. Harper sobbed. I miss you. We live at Grandma Sylvia's house now. It's small. Lily and I share a room. Mom cries every day. Dad yells. She said you're a bad person, and we can never see you again. Margaret stroked Harper's hair. Oh, sweetheart. Harper pulled back, looking straight at her. But you're not bad. You're the one who always made pies. Margaret held her tighter. The principal explained privately that the family environment was unstable, financial stress, emotional conflict. Margaret called Danielle that night. I need to see my granddaughters. Danielle replied, we can petition for grandparent visitation. The school report strengthens your case. It was another legal fight. Amelia resisted with venom, calling Margaret manipulative and cruel. But the same judge reviewed school documents, including drawings Harper made in therapy, pictures of a little girl, and a missing grandmother. The judge granted Margaret 2 weekends a month. When Margaret picked the girls up for the first time, they ran into her arms. She took them to her small apartment. They baked cookies. They watched movies. They didn't mention Amelia. Months passed. Routine formed. The girls told her that Amelia and Ryan lived in a cheaper place now. Amelia worked at a local office. She was exhausted and angry. One night, tucking Tessa in, the girl whispered, "Grandma, why don't you and Mommy talk?" Margaret sat at the edge of the bed, struggling for simple words. "Got your number from building records. I need to speak with you. Please call me, it's important." Margaret remembered her at once. The young lawyer, newly divorced, with a baby girl. Margaret used to babysit so Danielle could attend late court hearings. She brought her soup. She offered comfort. Margaret never asked for anything. That was who she had always been, helping, giving. She dialed the number. Danielle answered immediately, voice bright. "Mrs. Banks. Finally, I've been searching for you. You were my saving grace when I had nothing." Margaret smiled faintly. "It was nothing. It was everything," Danielle said. "And now it's my turn. I want to help you for free. Anything you ever need legally. I mean it." Margaret sat beside Tessa and tried to speak gently. "Sometimes adults hurt each other in ways that are hard to fix," she said softly. "Your mom and we hurt each other a lot." Tessa's small eyebrows lowered. "But do you still love her?" Margaret swallowed. That question always hurt. "Yes. I will always love your mom. She's my daughter. Loving someone, though, it doesn't mean you let them hurt you again and again." Tessa nodded, as if she somehow understood. That night, after the girls slept, Margaret sat at her tiny table with a cup of tea. It had been almost a year since that Thanksgiving. A year since the 6 chairs that did not include her. A year since she chose herself. Some days, she wondered if she should have tried again with Amelia. Other days, she remembered the tight smile, the dismissal, the word priority. She closed her eyes. She knew she didn't regret leaving. Saving herself was the first real act of love she had shown herself in decades. When the next weekend visit came, the girls rushed into Margaret's arms again, as if she were a shelter from a storm. They giggled through movies, helped her cook, and filled her small home with noise and joy. Harper had begun writing stories at school, tiny tales about brave girls and kind grandmothers. Tessa started drawing pictures of Thanksgiving tables, always with 7 chairs. Margaret never asked questions. She let the girls speak when they wanted. She listened. Over the following months, Margaret learned that Amelia and Ryan fought constantly. Ryan's income was unstable, and Amelia's small office job barely covered basics. They lived in a smaller, aging apartment now. The life Amelia once flaunted, events, home decor, private classes for the kids, was gone. Margaret felt no triumph in that. Only sadness. She was chasing something that never loved her back, Margaret murmured one evening. Still, she stayed on her side of the emotional boundary. She honored the judge's decision. She never called Amelia, never pushed, never offered money. She offered only one thing, love to the 2 little girls who still saw her clearly. One warm Sunday afternoon, as Margaret tucked a blanket around Harper during movie time, Harper whispered, "Grandma, Mommy doesn't smile anymore." Margaret brushed a curl from the girl's face. "She's going through hard things," she answered. Harper frowned. "Is it because of you?" Margaret shook her head. "Honey, adults make choices. Your mom made choices. I made mine. Hard times come from many things, not just one person." Harper looked down. "I still love her." Margaret nodded. "I do too." But inside, she understood something new. Amelia's unhappiness didn't justify mistreating others. Pain didn't excuse cruelty. Margaret had refused to be anyone's safety net if she was also their punching bag. That night, after dropping the girls off at the curb, Margaret stood on her porch. Amelia didn't look at her. She simply ushered the children back to the car. Her eyes were hollow, not angry anymore, just worn out. Margaret wondered whether time would soften anything between them, or whether distance was the only peace they could ever share again. Winter passed. Spring came. On the anniversary of that brutal Thanksgiving, Margaret baked a pecan pie for herself. Harper helped crimp the crust. Tessa arranged the nuts in perfect circles. The apartment smelled warm, like cinnamon, toasted edges, and new beginnings. Harper inhaled deeply and smiled. "Grandma, your house always smells like love." Tessa agreed. "And comfort." Margaret kissed both their heads. "Maybe it smells like priorities," she said lightly. The girls didn't understand, but they giggled anyway. Margaret sliced the pie. She sat with them at her tiny table, 3 plates, 3 cups of juice. It wasn't a grand dining room. No crystal glasses. No perfect linen. But there was sincerity. No performance. No hierarchy. Margaret felt full. Not from food, but from presence. For the first time in years, the table she sat at truly welcomed her. No one needed her money to make space. No one needed her silence to stay comfortable. The 2 children beside her were proof that love didn't disappear just because adults failed each other. Margaret looked out the window as the girls ate their slices. The world outside was calm. No legal threats. No secret payments. No humiliation waiting at a polished dining table. She thought of Amelia, not with bitterness, but with a strange acceptance. Some relationships, she thought, are not meant to return to what they were. Sometimes you must let go so you don't vanish inside someone else's life. She had lost her seat at her daughter's table, but she had built her own. And at this new table, she had a solid, permanent chair. She was no longer invisible. She was Margaret Banks, a woman who had stepped out of the shadows of financial obligation and emotional begging. She was a grandmother with 2 children who adore her. She was a woman who finally understood that love without respect becomes self-destruction. Margaret lifted her fork and took a bite of pie. She smiled at Harper and Tessa. She no longer chased invitations. She no longer waited to be chosen. She chose herself. And in choosing herself, she found the peace she was denied for so long. Margaret finally belonged to herself. Thanks for watching. If you value stories of respect, dignity, and justice, please subscribe. It means more than you know, and it lets me keep sharing the lessons life has carved into me.